Welcome everyone to tonight's Hoshinden Fireside Chat podcast. Hopefully you're warm. It's freezing here in Melbourne. Today I dropped my kids at school and it was 2 degrees when I left this morning, nice and icy. So I hope that you're warm. This week on the show I have a very special guest. I have Dr. Nicole Weeks, who has a PhD and master's degree in psychology. So Nikki and I, we have a background in martial arts. We met 20 odd years ago. Through the same martial art in Sydney. And it's lovely to have you on the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We had some fun because I was talking to your husband a couple of weeks ago. I think we had with Tim Brown. And we've done 2 or 3 of these chats now. I think maybe 2 chats. And at the end, I said, I really want to get Nikki on the show because it'd be great to chat as a trained psychologist who I know works, like you work with Tim and his fitness business, his self-defense business, in developing systems and discussions and conversation pieces, especially for teenagers, around very key topics in self-defense. So I mean, we can get to that later, but like that was so awesome. So thank you for joining me after that my request.
No worries at all.
So just to start off, because I know a lot about you, but I don't think students and people at home do, would you be able to just give us a little intro to yourself?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, we met martial arts. I did martial arts for a good 10 years, but I admit I haven't done it for 10 years or so since. Having said that, I've been thinking a lot about it. I've since got my, as you said, master's and PhD in psychology, and I've done areas I've sort of focused on have been resilience. So I've been more interested in what makes people go from good to great rather than the traditional, what goes wrong with people. That's not where I've focused.
Nice.
So I've looked into motivation, decision-making, and this sort of positive psychology of, what can go right about people, what makes people resilient, that sort of thing.
That's a great, is that like a trademark quote of your own? What can go right with people?
Maybe I should make it so.
Yeah, you should do t-shirts and that's great. In terms of the overarching theme, this podcast series is from a martial art perspective, myself as a martial artist, and these are presented primarily from the perspective of the Reigning Spirit Dojo from Hoshinden. So maybe we could start the chat by just dancing around psychology for those who are at home who have maybe a mythological idea of psychology or psychologists. Could you give us like a bit of a description or definition of terms?
Yeah, well, I mean, psychology is such a broad space. I mean, obviously it's the study of the mind, but then exactly where you go with that is where all the branches of psychology come. Those who really want to know which neurons to talk to which neurons in the brain, they become neuropsychologists. And, those who want to know how do people change throughout their lives, they become developmental psychologists. I admit I've sort of ended up in limbo because all those things are fascinating to me. So I've done a fair bit of research, like my own sort of research into various peer-reviewed journal articles on all sorts of things. I've taken an interest in the study of the mind generally, but also I think psychology, a shortcoming of traditional psychology is that it's been a bit too individualistic. So the difference between a social worker, for example, and a psychologist is looking at this person's brain. How has it changed due to what has happened in their life? Whereas a social worker has a much broader perspective. They're more thinking about what's the culture around this person, what's all the people around this person, how is that context affecting this person? And certainly psychology is growing now to accept, and some more models are incorporating that context.
Fascinating. Which so I imagine that that context could even provide half of the answers to some of the questions when someone's zoned in, like super close to an individual and says, wow, where is that behavior from? And that maybe it's actually cultural or kind of answered through the context, I imagine.
Yeah, that's right. And it's I mean, I guess it's sort of, I mean, there's always going to be that interplay. You know, if someone's depressed, they've got a certain neurochemicals in their brain, but that may well have come about from some of the context around them as well. So it's this sort of interplay, but then because they're thinking in that way, or then it changes their actions, and then that affects their context, you know. So it's this cyclical thing.
Yeah. Fascinating. Okay, so then in terms of your PhD in psychology, and you're commenting on the different areas, do you just consider yourself like a general psychologist, that you focus in a particular area out of interest, as opposed to being like a defined this psychologist? Or
Yeah, I do. I consider myself a general psychologist. And I guess what that means is that, I mean, I've definitely done some fairly deep research into decision making, into motivation, and into resilience. There have been 3 areas where I've focused a lot of my research, as well as sleep, infant sleep.
Oh, yeah,
because that became very topical for a period of time.
You can always tell the parents.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it was that moment when I was like pre-kids. I was like, oh, I know psychology, and I know the best environment for a child to grow up in. And so I'm going to be like a fantastic parent.
And then before
I
children,
had kids and I went, I know nothing. How do I do this? I know the theory, but then how do you actually put that into practice?
Oh, totally. I think I can't remember exactly the quote, but it was along that line. This funny, almost like the Fireside, cartoon, those comics. But it was what was it, like a seminar, and there's a guy up on stage, and the whole seminar is parents to be, so none of them have children, and it's this thing of like, we know exactly what to do, and this is fantastic. I'm the greatest parent on earth. And then there's the posting 10 years later, and they're all like, I have no idea what I'm doing. My children haven't turned out anything like what I thought. So true.
That's right. Yeah. So I read Punished by Rewards, and that sent me on this. And that sent me on this sort of research tour of, so how do you motivate people such that you're not just bribing? And so this sort of autonomy supportive way of raising children, I was like, oh, okay, great, I've got it down pat. And then but then you have tiny children who you can't rationalize with them yet, because they don't have that bit of their brain that understands that stuff. So totally. Then, and you need them to get to sleep, but they don't feel like going to sleep. It's like, how do I do this in a non-controlling way? How do I support their autonomy in this, when their autonomy would say, okay, I'm going to do what's not good for me?
Totally.
So it's that,
where the theory meets the rubber of the road, the reality.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
That's super interesting. So something you just said, maybe we can head off in that tangent, especially in the context of martial arts and self-defense, where you mentioned, you were talking about decision making, motivation, and resilience, as these kind of, and mindset as these really key areas. That seems like a really good place to start.
Okay.
I mean, we're talking about that's right. No, but like, we can have, but if maybe we start with motivation and that topic of motivation and inspiration in terms of say a martial arts setting or a self-defense setting. So I know that you work with your husband, and it's predominantly with the teenagers, or like especially with the teenagers, teenage students.
Yeah, especially with teenagers.
Tell us a bit about from what angle is it that you're getting involved, or like what is it that is the focus in what you're delivering with it?
So I run a few different programs. So one of them's Party Safe. So that's cool. Really aimed at adolescent girls who are about to start partying. And it's sort of helping them. I sort of take the approach of before you get your child to cross the road by themselves,
Yeah.
you warn them about the danger of
Yeah.
cars.
And you
You
hold
know?
their hand and cross the road a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you practice a few times and they know exactly what they're looking out for. But I felt that often young girls don't know what they're looking out for. Because there's, and yeah, I mean, it could get into sort of trigger warning area, but
yeah. Speak whatever you'd like to speak.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you decide where you'd like to go with that. So,
yeah. But I feel that, yeah, for young girls, they don't, they've usually at school, rape has been defined, but I feel like it's often sort of portrayed as this, a guy will jump out of the bushes when you're walking alone and it's dark and you're maybe not wearing much. Like it's very narrow circumstances where this thing occurs.
Gotcha. Which is probably very unrealistic in terms of the large majority of what actually occurs.
Exactly. Extremely. Yeah. So I guess my approach is not to scare them, but to explore the realities of, it's not always violent. It's knowing where your boundaries are and what you're comfortable with. And also, I guess, having those security, sort of thinking about things in advance and having those security measures in place. So they're things like knowing how you can contact your parents if you need to. They're things like knowing if you're feeling sort of pressured to do something with your friends, knowing, like setting up a code word with your parents, for example, that might be, you know, if I ring and ask about how my dog's doing.
Yeah, I need you to come to the party and pick me up.
That means, you know, you need to come and get me. But I don't want to say that.
In front of
or if I text you a why, then that means give me a call and say there's a family emergency and just come and get me.
Give me an excuse to
Yeah, exactly. So an easy out for teenagers who are worried about their appearance amongst their friends. But also thinking about their escape routes.
Which is really just strategy, isn't it? Like, I mean,
it is.
Because we talked a lot on the show with a lot of other people about strategy. We talked about you know, combat strategy, economic strategy, political strategy. It's really just situational strategy and future context, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. That's right. But it's I guess getting them to think through the different contexts in which that applies, because in a way you sort of think about that strategy when it's dark and it's late and you're alone kind of deal.
Gotcha.
And it's thinking about that strategy when you're going to a party. So who's driven me there? Is there a way that I can get out of there quickly? So if I've been dropped off, how quickly can someone come and pick me up? Or if I'm relying on my friends' parents to pick me up, or my friend, maybe they've driven, what if they're drunk? You know, just sort of thinking through all of those possible situations. And it's really about, it's about in the moment, especially if there's been drinking involved or anything like that, it can be really difficult, especially when you're panicked as well. Your frontal lobes go offline. So that's the bit that does all the thinking through things, the thinking, if I do this, then that, all that goes offline. You just do what's automatic. So if you've thought through some of these things beforehand and you've gone, okay, if something bad happens, I'm going to do this, then it just means that they're more likely to do that.
You've got like a slight habit or some memory of it. It's not just a new process.
Exactly. So you've started thinking through those.
That sounds
situations.
Great. Okay, so I can see. So in terms of a presentation for the teenagers, and I assume that this is commenting on teenage girls, but probably presented to the whole group of teenage boys and girls, so that everyone's aware of the topics and
Yeah,
conversations that are going on?
that workshop that I've been talking mainly about has
Yep.
mainly been with just teenage girls.
Okay. Yep.
Um, but you're right, a lot of it does apply to both. And it's the sort of thing that I've been weaving into some of the things we talk to the teenagers about in class as well.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's a good segue. So we're talking about like you've got a few different little I call them packages or
Yeah.
presentations. What else do you find yourself working with the teenagers?
Yeah, so I also do, it's less martial arts related, less self-defense related, I suppose. I also do resilience workshops.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, so they're really important they're just life skills of flexible thinking.
Yeah.
But I use this model that I really like, and it's by Louise Hayes and
Yeah.
Joe Kaliyoki. I think that's how you say it. I don't have the right accent, but
If he's listening to the show, we'll send you an email.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. So which is called the DNAV model, and that's the teenagers can really identify with that. It helps to normalize a lot of the stuff that goes on in our head and in our minds, that we see other people's highlight reel, you know.
Yeah. Everyone on
And
Instagram looks like they're having the time of their life,
that's right, yeah.
living on
Yeah,
yachts.
but
And
we hear all the self-doubt and the thoughts
right.
and the criticism in our head,
Yes.
and we look around and everyone else has got this, perfect life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's sort of normalizing that experience and recognizing that everyone's experience is sort of like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
It's funny that you say that because just to segue for a minute, but to come back to what you're saying,
Yeah.
I've found throughout my life, in any context, not just martial arts, when I'm meeting someone, talking with someone, even if I've met them for the first time, even in business, it's amazing what just laughing about some faults or making some jokes about some of the funny, difficult realities puts everyone at ease. And then we're all feeling like, oh, that's relieving. You also
Yeah.
don't sleep when your children are, oh, good.
Yeah.
We all just kind of relax and
Yeah, that's right. It is interesting, isn't it? It's sort of a way we connect with people is to reveal our vulnerability in a way, to reveal those flaws. But it takes courage as well to do so.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something we look at as well. As soon as you have something that concerns you or worries you, or it indicates that there's something you care deeply about.
Yeah, definitely. Well
And
said.
so you need to, we talk about how you need to make a decision in your life. If I were to offer you a coin, and on one side of that coin is everything you care about, everything that adds meaning to your life, everything that's important to you, would you choose to take that coin knowing that on the other side of it is the fear of failure, the fear of loss, all of those sort of things? You can't separate those two.
Yeah. The
you
joy and
choose
sorrow
to hold
are
that coin,
inseparable. Yeah.
or you choose to care about nothing.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I joke that I have the key to a carefree life.
Yeah, it's just no one wants it.
Yeah, no one wants it. That's right.
Yeah, it's not worth the.
Yeah,
that's great. I mean, I won't. There's not enough time now, but it takes me back to thinking of like so many Zen parables and and Buddhism parables over the years. My teachers have taught me exactly that. That they say, well, I can remove all your suffering, but unfortunately, the compromise is that you're also going to lose your depth of care and your memories. If you don't want to feel sorrow about loss, then that's easy. I'll just make you forget everything that ever happened. Is that really what you want?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And that's very much the approach. This is the DNAV model is a version of the acceptance commitment therapy model,
right.
Which is exactly that sort of principle. So yeah, it's sort of that, it's learning to live with and sit with your uncomfortable emotions. And that's really, really important, because every time you ask someone out, every
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
you every time you do anything like that where you're putting yourself on the line, you have uncomfortable emotions. So to take a lot of the most meaningful steps in your life, you need to be able to sit with those uncomfortable emotions.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
so it's
Reminds me of a very cheesy quote off a set of like Japanese flags, like little buy them at the local temple shops kind of thing. It talks about courage. It says, courage is not the absence of fear or despair, but the willingness to move forward anyway.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's a very cheesy, t-shirt sort of logo piece, but
Yeah.
I mean, definitely, I can think of my whole life. There's nothing that I have ever gained that was necessarily without cost, and the cost could often have been, fear of repercussion or embarrassment or humiliation or the possible risk of it all just exposing my, deepest flaws.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean I mean, every job I've ever gone for, I've felt horrendously nervous.
It's almost like you knew to bring this up because it's a perfect segue to do. So do you remember in Hoshin we used to do the Red Belt Challenge? So at Rangspur Dojo, we replicated a version of that called the 12-week challenge. And and it's effectively the same kind of premise. And on the piece of paper I can hand out to everyone, the subtitle I say is, you're going to learn to become comfortable feeling very uncomfortable. And it's been of everything that the dojo has as an activity or development stages, the 12-week challenge is probably the most thing that people comment on, higher in their grades, and they're 5 years past it. They still talk about how much that changed them when they showed themselves that they can feel uncomfortable and they can get up and go to work anyway, or they can feel uncomfortable, or they can I really, really, really just want something, ice cream, whatever, and I'm just gonna get on with my life. I have to go through it every year because obviously as the teachers I force all my teacher students to go through it as well.
Right.
It's still making major effects. It's still having a really positive contribution in my life, even it's been like 20 years or 21 years. And so it sounds like a different activity version of what you were just talking about, this get used to feeling uncomfortable. And
absolutely. And that gives me ideas of a good way to implement what they sort of learn in these resilience workshops is to choose something that they want to work on, because it's very you can't break our old habit or form a new one without some discomfort.
Totally. Yeah. It's funny because when you put it like that, it's like, well, logically, of course. And yet in the middle of it, when you're like 10 spoons into your ice cream every day, it's difficult. But it's funny because I say to the students, and it's primarily I aim it at the teenage students and adults. The children's students I didn't run this with in this way, but maybe from like ages 12, like 11, 12 on. And then obviously the adults, it's very different. It takes on a little bit more of a much more personal, they have a lot more to lose. The character they've built over 50 years. But I do tell everyone has to choose something of their own to add to the list. So there's the usual list of the substances and media, blah, 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 that we're doing without, but everyone has to add something from their private life. And I make a point of saying that they don't need to discuss that with anyone. Like, it doesn't need to be, it's not like a shame. So, they don't need to actually come and present that. If they want to feel some kind of, what's the word, like that there's someone that they feel responsible to.
Accountability.
Accountability. Then every now and then I get a handful that come and they talk to me, they send emails and they say, this is what I'm working on. But very, very often I don't hear what it is they're working on, but they say at the end of the, a few weeks after the end, how much they liked having, how important that was to have their own, that they could add their own little flavor to it. And apparently, without giving me details, they've said that some of it's been deeply, deeply personal, like key issues in their marriage or certain character trait issues that they've wanted to get a handle on for a very long time.
Yeah, which is a good segue actually into another program we do, which is assertiveness.
Right.
So we call it communicating with strength.
Nice. There's some great titles.
But yeah, yeah.
Hope you trademarked all these before the recording goes live.
Oh, good idea.
Yeah. No, these are all copyright and trademark. So Dr. Nicole Weeks.
Yeah. So yeah, that's about sort of figuring out, I guess, what's most important to you, what you value. Because you need to know that to know what you're defending in a way. So where it's important to be assertive, because assertiveness is about it's about mutual respect. It's about respecting your needs as well as the other person's needs. And in places where they conflict, negotiating those such that neither party feels like their needs have been sacrificed in that arrangement. And not just needs, but also preferences, and feeling willing to, well, first of all, knowing what they are, but second of all, sort of being willing to speak up about them. And people can be on any end of that spectrum. So they can be the people who tend to always prioritize their own needs and not think about others. Or they can be at the other end where they usually prioritize others and they don't think about their own.
And both are as detrimental to self.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or detrimental to their interpersonal relationships and their own aspirations, I imagine.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, people who value kindness really highly, for example, will often be very kind to all the people around them, but they forget that they need to be kind to themselves as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes being kind to themselves isn't saying yes to everyone else. Sometimes you need to be able to say, no, actually, that time I need to myself.
Definitely.
And sort of knowing that line can be tricky.
I suppose reframing it in that way, because I can imagine that usually society presents that, especially to teenagers, as boundaries, and they're like, hey, we're going to talk about boundaries, but then reframing it as like assertiveness with strength, or like presenting and communicating with strength is in that reframing, it might be a metaphor that a few extra people can catch, or where boundaries was maybe a little bit too abstract, or they say, yes, I get it, but how do I what do I do about my boundaries? I get that I don't have any.
That's right.
What do I do about that? Or what's the method that I actually take to make a change?
Yeah, that's right. And it is really difficult, because where you draw that line is different in all sorts of different circumstances with different people, and it has to be. It's quite right that it should be.
Yes.
For example, you'll welcome a friend in your house. They come to the door and you say, oh, come in, I'll get you tea. But you don't do the same thing for, the postie.
The Amway salesman.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you do. You've seen the postie the last 15 years. Maybe you do, but
Yeah, but I suppose then it's not just the postie. They've become the friend Bill, who's also a postie. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I mean, that just seems like, when you kind of take it to that abstract layer, it just seems like a natural response to the human social grouping element, that there are certain dangers to the social group, and that there's a certain level of, not suspicion, but I don't know what the right word would be, differentiality between, these are the people that I've determined are very close to my group, and identification, these are the people who are in the middle. So, I don't shout them off the property, but I maybe just talk to them at the door. And then these are the people that I don't let within a 4-kilometer radius,
Yeah, that's right. And there are of course individual differences there. There's some people who are really open with everyone. Some to the extent of oversharing. Yes. And then there's also cultural differences as well. How much sharing of, like, I was talking to a friend the other day, and she was saying that from her culture, you know, if there was a sporting contest, or even just kids going up to receive a certificate, you know, everyone would be cheering and clapping and like
Yeah.
showing a lot of that emotion.
Yeah.
But she said she feels here she doesn't see nearly as much emotion, and she feels odd
Oh,
because
right, because she's
she
like,
wants to show
"Woo!"
her emotion.
Yeah, she wants to cheer.
But we're sort of relatively restrained.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there'd be other cultures. There are definitely other cultures where it's the opposite.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I felt more restrained in Japan than I feel here in terms
Yes.
of.
Yeah, definitely. But then I imagine that you go to a soccer game in Spain.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like everyone's on fire, and everyone's it's that these sliding extremes. So it's like really, and then it's contextual to the society that you're grown within, because I imagine that if you've got lots of people who are within a society who've grown up, maybe it's been decades there, they have a conscious or not conscious understanding of the social context, then we start to work out like, oh, well, it does feel odd when I'm in Tokyo. But that's only because I'm used to a different social context. There's actually nothing odd about it at all. And everyone else in Tokyo is completely fine and look at me like I'm a little bit strange.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's really helpful to have that sort of perspective, I guess, in a way. And it can also, knowing the cultural norms of the place you're in can be helpful for determining if someone's maybe purposefully crossing some boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. So I mean, an example is traveling on a train in Sydney. If it like this was, I mean, even pre-COVID, if it's an empty train carriage
and someone sits directly next to you,
sits directly next to you, that's really odd, right?
11
that's
p.m.
sort of,
at night.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's sort of sus behavior in a way, because it's breaking that cultural norm.
The cultural norm,
quite a lot.
Which brings up the red flag. And it's funny because obviously there are legitimate times where that's just a cultural misunderstanding. But then I think what goes along, my experience of that is that when that's been the case, there has not, what's been absent is a feeling of like unsafeness for myself, you know, that maybe I'm suspicious at how this person is sitting next to me at 1 a.m. on a completely empty carriage. But I don't feel like I want to move all my guts turning. Whereas there's certainly times where it's like, oh, I really, really want to get away from this person. And I thought, oh, it's just worth following those and not waiting to find out, you know. But it's funny because I mentioned this a lot to my teenage students. We talk about social contexts and about how important it is from a strategic perspective. I'm just talking about martial artists learning to put themselves in the best possible place. You know, whether that's like, hey, you're an adult and you're at a restaurant and there's a lot of drinking going on, and you start to notice that as the night rolls on, it's becoming slightly less safe or very turbulent. Maybe it's a good time for you to move yourself closer to the exit. Move to a table that's very close to the door, move outside onto the street, you know, things like that. Very, very subtle things where you're not waving a flag. Or for the teenagers, exactly, we talk about parties and how to walk around with, you know, cups of water. So you skip the embarrassment of not drinking, and you're drinking a lot of, you know, green colored water. But how important the social context is to feel, what's the word, to make a decision on the first step of safety as such. Like you said, if there's social norms that are being maybe not ignored, but I'm not sure what the term is, overridden, that is a really important flag. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the other person's heinously evil and you need to take them down. It just means that you need to quickly make some decisions about, well, you're not sure what the intention is. What would be the most intelligent thing to do right now? You know, maybe it is to move closer to another group of people, or pretend that you're getting off at the next train stop and say thanks to the person and just get off the train and wait at the platform for the next one, stuff like that.
Yeah, it reminds me of a couple of things I work through with the teenagers. One is intuition,
Mm.
and sort of from a psychological perspective, intuition is a thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's effectively it's an automatic system that is based on some very subtle cues that we are always perceiving,
Yep.
but we don't necessarily consciously register.
Yep.
So the example that I give is you're standing at a corner and you're looking to cross, and you're looking at all the cars are coming and trying to figure out whether they're going to turn. I've often been in the situation where there's no indicator on, but you just get this feeling
that they're going, yeah,
you shouldn't step
don't
out
walk.
now. Don't walk now. Yeah. And so there's so many things that, and it can be helpful, and something I help them to do is to, when these things happen, to think through what cues is my intuition picking up on. Because not that we need to rationalize intuition, but the reason for it is just so that we can learn to trust our intuition, to realize that I probably knew that because they were slowing down. Maybe I saw the driver looking this way. Maybe I saw a slight turn in the car. All these sort of subtle cues that may well have triggered this. And in some more complex driving situations, it might just be a reflection in a window, or, some really subtle reflection of light that just cued your brain to realize that a car's coming from that direction.
Yes. Yeah.
So sort of learning to trust that intuition and recognize what it feels like is really important, because you're right. There's those situations where it looks the same, but in one situation you get this feeling like I need to get out of here. And another one you're like, this is fine, this is weird, but this is fine.
It's just that he's from some super laid back country where it's totally fine to sit next to people at 11 o'clock at night on a city train. No one ever gets mugged.
Maybe he wants to chat, or maybe he's lonely, but he's not going to do anything untoward.
That's right. There isn't like an aggressive or a violent intention at heart. Which again, we're back to like moment to moment, because you can't possibly make a blanket. No one can make a blanket. No. When this happens, it always means that. So it's got to be personable.
And it's sort of the same with intuition. I mean, there's situations in which intuition is not going to help you, which are if, like, for example, you're reading a book and listening to something, and your perception's not picking up anything, If you're not looking in the vague direction of the cars, you're not going to notice if one's turning, So there has to be that way of picking up the cues.
Yes.
But also, I mean, I don't know, alcohol can also change your focus of your mind. So there's sort of this tunnel vision effect that alcohol can have. And so you don't notice the more subtle periphery cues. I'm not sure in that situation whether you'd get the intuition as well.
More research to be done.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
So like scooting that line in a big round arch, and then looking back at this kind of overarching theme of your work in self-defense and psychology. So talking about where self-defense and psychology collide, where the study of psychology and self-defense collide. Is there a particular area? I know that you're talking about these programs. Is there one key area that really excites you, that you're like, these are great, but I'm absolutely obsessed with XYZ?
Oh, wow.
And the answer could be no. Like,
I mean, I guess where my passion is, where I really want to make a difference, is helping young people to stay adventurous, but to be safe doing so and not end up traumatized from their adventures.
That's so funny. I think of my adventures and like, oh, they're all traumatic adventures. And you know, apart from that twitch every day, like I'm totally fine. So I mean, it's funny because I think back, I don't know, you and I met when 20 years ago, 2001 it might have been. Turramurra Dojo, both studying martial arts, the Hoshin Dojo in Sydney. And I have good memories of your 21st birthday, I think, when we went caving.
Oh, really? Yeah, caving.
We're going caving in Wee Jasper, you know, down underground for 10 hours, having fun. And so that, I'm trying to think, that kind of time for me, like, that's still young adult, you know, adventurous, curiosity, trying things, this, that, trying to work out, posing questions, being like, oh, that doesn't fit at all, you know, those kinds of things. What was my question? I did have a really poignant point for that. I'm gonna have to quickly jump back. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So I was thinking, if we take that and then talk about teenagers and your comment that you want to help them maintain excitement, passion for life, and yet kind of develop wisely, because there is a thing in society, isn't it? A lot of people, they fall off that knife edge and they just become bitter and angry, and it's like, I never should have left my street because it all went wrong, you know, that kind of thing. And yet you're like, well, no, that's not right. And then you have the other extreme where people are they're just an absolute, they've just liquidated themselves into a mess, you know, in every country, scrape them off the floor in a Berlin rave club some nights. And so somewhere in the middle, this excitement for life, passion for what's more, and this, I suppose it comes back to, we're talking about boundaries again, aren't we? That if someone has a relatively intact sense of self-esteem, they're probably going to be able to reach slightly beyond their current comfortability, and yet if things poke or push too hard, they can fall back to a stable sense of self-esteem. Is that kind of...
So I mean, adolescence is a really interesting point in development, because like in each developmental phase of life, you have different sort of focuses, different things that are important to develop. And one of the really sort of driving forces in adolescence is figuring out who they are as a person independent from their parents. So they've spent their childhood sort of living beneath their parents, if you like.
Yes.
And adolescence there's definitely a developmental task of figuring out, who am I? And part of that discovery is a really important part of that discovery is that discoverer space, as you call it in the DNAV model, which is that risk-taking, that trying new things and going, well, was that me or was that not me? You know? So if you think back to your time as a teenager, and I won't ask you to reveal anything, but, you know, there's some things that you look back on. I think everyone has them, where they look back on them and they go, wow, that's so not who I've become. But that's part of adolescence, is you try it and you reflect on it and you go, no, I don't think I'll do that again.
Totally. You know? It was, I think my experiences were like, wow, I can't believe I'm still alive. I don't think I'm going to do that again.
That's right. So I mean, ideally, it's really hard as a parent to you know, to think about that time coming up for your kids, because I mean, certainly we all took risks.
It's funny because
night out.
That's right. Well, like you said, you're exploring and you're trying to find out, especially if you've lived under the thumb of an extremely strict family model. I remember I think it was a comment my mother made to me. So I moved out of home when I was about 16, or just before I was 17. 16, 9 months or something. And I remember there were a few years I left, lots of issues with my father. We didn't, you know, that's it, I'm leaving. And so it didn't really have much to do with my parents for a couple of years. And I remember my mother commenting maybe when I was 19, and it was the first good conversation with her that I'd had in a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I was telling her about all these things, these adventures and that, and she said, "Oh, actually, I think I appreciated it more when I didn't know, when when you know, you just popped in once a year and you were still alive and well. But now that I know all of the crazy things you've been doing," she's like, "Oh, I think that's worse."
Yeah.
That was funny. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I didn't know. It would have been like a white knuckle flight for them, I'm sure."
Yeah, that's so true.
my
Yeah.
my grandfather, when my first child was born, who's now
Yeah.
11,
Yeah.
my grandfather was a very cheeky man. He said to me, "Look, all I can say is I pray that your children put you through as much gray hair raising stress as you've put us through." And I thought, I don't know if that's that's a terrible thing to wish for you. And I thought it wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
Like you say, I think back in, there'd be pages of, "Try that, no, yeah, no, kind of, not really, 90%, no." And
Yeah.
everything, relationships, dynamics, interpersonal dynamics, everything.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, and I guess what the DNAB model says about that discovery phase is the risk taking is important, but that to get adolescents to think about why they're doing it, what's the sort of is it actually acting, and how do they, and also the really important thing, I guess, is thinking back on it.
Yeah.
Was that who I wanted to be? Was that
Mm.
what I wanted to be doing?
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah.
Is that who I want to become?
Exactly.
Mm.
Yeah. Is that who I want to become?
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Thinking through the consequences,
Yeah.
basically, because teens don't think through the consequences as well as they do later, especially beforehand.
Especially after the consequences have played out. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Which is part of that frontal lobe still developing thing.
Right.
That frontal lobe doesn't fully develop until, I think they say, around 25 or so.
Maybe 35. So talking about that, like, is that saying that the ability to kind of abstractly conceptualize a series of possible if then else kind of consequences, that in itself is very mature for adolescents, and therefore it's like it's hard to just use your mind to theorize about what the problem might be.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's right. You can pull from previous experiences. So I've seen that happen, and I've seen this as a result.
Yeah.
But it's much harder to theorize about all the possible outcomes.
Which makes great sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So an example of that is, for example, seeing people smoking cigarettes. You've seen, or e-cigarettes. You've seen nothing happen, or you've seen them smoke fancy rings, but you haven't seen them die of
the
lung
consequences.
cancer.
Yeah. Whereas if you've had like an aunt, or you've had someone in the family who has,
that's right, you might have seen that.
That is funny, because I think back to that, and I always felt very grateful that I was maybe through a poor choice of friends surrounded by people who were showing me what not to do.
Right.
Family and social friends chosen at the time, that there was a wealth of opportunity to look around and be like, no. I think one of my favorite quotes, though, I can't remember who said it, but it says, "Some people get to learn by looking from others' actions, and some of us just have to urinate on the electric fence for ourselves."
Right.
And I don't, it's like such a crass comment, but for me, I laughed because I was like, sometimes it is like that. You just maybe, and I like you saying, maybe if there's no one around who you got to role model, or not even role model, to reflect on, and you're at that stage of development, well, then the main choice left is see what happens if you pee on the electric fence, and then hopefully your friends watch and go, I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
I don't have to do that
But
now.
I think the problem with a lot of the things that teens do sort of experiment with is that then they don't get as an immediate feedback as the electric fence scenario.
Yeah, right.
You
So talk
know,
about smoking. It's like
that's a
30
very
years later.
immediate,
Yes.
obvious, everyone gets it
Yeah.
kind of result.
Gotcha,
You know?
gotcha. Yeah. Whereas things like the alcohol, the drugs, that's much more
Yeah.
subtle, longer term problems. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's much harder to think through and really visualize or see those longer term outcomes or those very small minimal risks. So for example, like e-cigarettes, some of them have no nicotine. So there's sort of unknown health consequences.
And we'll find out. It's an
But
experiment.
they can,
we'll find out in 20
I
years.
don't know how many times, but they can explode in your mouth. Like they heat things to 350 degrees and you're putting them in your mouth.
Yeah.
So, you know, there are very rare incidences of, you know, explosions or burnt mouth or burnt like leg or whatever. But, you know, that's not what you see. You see heaps of friends using them with no danger.
Sure.
And it's, so it's hard to conceptualize those smaller risks or those more far away risks. Yeah.
Something to be said for adults commenting or being quite upfront or presenting, you know, certain consequences to teenagers. I remember it was like a driver education. I think you should do this. Maybe you did this when you were in school as well. Maybe in year 11 or 12, a whole group were taken out to like one of the driver courses, the private race courses where you do motorbike training or things like that. And it's a whole day of basically, these are all the terrible and appalling ways that you can die in a motor vehicle. And it, you know, it was kind of like, you're watching videos, blah, 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 blah. And it was all just imagery. It wasn't until the one of the facilitators, he just came out and he just said straight up, look, it's going to sound really terrible, but statistically, one of you in the room here will be dead before you're 18. And something about that, you know, and there were maybe like 30 of us, you know, like a class. And to have this, and he was probably in his 40s, to have this older man come out. So he's playing this role. He's the facilitator. He's the expert in the room, to come out and just be so straight up about that. And for me to look around the room and be like, there's only 30 people here.
Yeah.
This is narrowed now. This isn't like 1 in 100 million chance. This is like 1 in 30 chance of. And I was like, and suddenly it was like, well, even if it's not just me, I know all these people. I know them really closely, you know. So to think that any one of them would be the one in the statistic who died would suddenly hit me emotionally. And I think I was like, really right, I'm okay. 3 seconds between every car, you know, like I instantly changed my driving at that point.
Yeah, because that can be and it's interesting you say that, because that can be a problem as well with perceiving risk, is that this sort of, it's quite a natural, many people have it as an underlying belief that you know, good things happen to be good people, effectively. And therefore people have this, well, it won't happen to me
because I'm the good person. Yeah,
because I'm a good person. I'm sensible, you know. But it's interesting that you say that. So it's about helping them realize that it's someone they know. You know, it's them or someone they know.
I think that was the part. Yeah, it wasn't an abstract. It wasn't, you know, I like as a child, I don't know if you got this near, my father would be like, you eat your dinner because there's children starving in Africa. And I'm like, I don't know anyone in Africa. I'm a 5. And if you're that worried, ship the horrible meal over to, you know, whereas that's such an abstract concept for a child. And then as a teenager, for someone to come in and say, look, I hope that you're all really close because unfortunately it's a Russian roulette. One of you will be dead. And I think what even made it like that's exactly how that played out. You know, one of my schoolmates died from a car related injury around 18, 19. And I remember really vividly at that time, years again, a couple of years after that experience at thing, it came right back to me, the words of that facilitator. And I was like, wow. Well, lucky that was done. So now I'm invincible. Just some light humor. That is not, for everyone at home, that is not what happened inside my brain.
Yeah. It's not quite how systems work.
So I suppose we're kind of, we're launching into an area and a topic that we discussed before the recording that maybe it's a good segue into, talking about trauma-informed training and decision making. So does this start to walk us into that field a little bit?
Yeah. So I guess what's important there for me is that you want martial arts and definitely self-defense training to be accessible to people who have had some incident that means they want to be able to defend themselves. And that's actually a really important step for recovery for some people as well, especially if something happened to them and they felt helpless in that situation. Self-defense can be a way that they can re-experience fighting back, and almost rewrite that story in their mind.
It's like a Gestalt therapy kind of role play, archetypal role play.
That kind of thing, obviously you'd want a trained therapist to be doing that role play thing, but it is. I mean, it's that sort of learning that their body can be powerful, and I guess getting past that learned helplessness in a way. Learned helplessness is from way back when psychologists didn't have an ethics committee. And they were pretty horrible.
Wow.
And they put these poor dogs in these cages and they electrified them. And they did that multiple times, and the dogs would do everything they could to try to escape that cage, but they couldn't get away from the electric shock. It's horrible. Psychologists now are not allowed to do that. But what they found was that then if they left the door open, after this had happened for a while, they left the door open, the dog would just lie there and take the electric shock.
Just given up.
It wouldn't try to escape. And so that's learned helplessness. And it can happen in humans too. There's this freeze response, which is there's an initial freeze, which is very natural. Freeze, assess the situation. If you can run, you run. If you can fight, you fight. But definitely for some people, the automatic assessment, and this is when you're in a traumatic situation, this frontal lobe switches off. So you're no longer thinking through consequences, all that sort of thing. You're not rationally thinking about the situation. You've moved back to the more emotional side of your brain. And if that very quick assessment says, there's nothing I can do here, that I'm helpless, then the body can shut down and there can be this freeze response. And that's different for different people. It can be completely going rigid and being able to see and hear everything, but not being able to move, almost being paralyzed.
Wow.
Really, really horrible.
Wow.
Or for other people, it can be this disengagement, their body just shuts down and they're sort of limp. They can then be moved around however, and they might come in and out of consciousness. And these are very quick assessments that happen with not the human, very cognitive, logical thinking side of our brain. It's the back, very emotional, very animalistic.
Gotcha.
How am I best going to survive this situation? And if that assessment says running won't work, fighting won't work, lying here might work. So and that's what it does. It just shuts down your body.
It's the
and
T-Rex dinosaur cornered me into a piece. There's nowhere to run. There's nothing I can do. So I'll just die. Well,
Yeah, yeah,
Die with the
yeah,
minimum
very
amount
much
of
so.
expenditure.
But yeah, but it's not. It is protective, because sometimes it's sort of like playing dead in a way. Might
Yeah.
work for some animals, and the
Yeah.
predator will go away. It's similar to that, and it happens often in sexual assault, because the assault will happen and you will still be alive.
Right. So it's kind of like a
horribly traumatized, but alive.
So it's this concept that's like, I've just got to get to the other side of this, or there'll be, you know, tomorrow, things like that.
Yeah, that's right. It's the very it's not like we're talking in words, and so we can't convey
touch.
what it's like, because our like that emotional part of the brain doesn't talk in words. It's just, how do I survive? And recovering from that, especially if someone's had a freeze response, can be really, really hard. There can be a lot of self-blame, a lot of, why the hell didn't I do anything? And in a way, martial arts or self-defense can then be very confronting, because in a way it's saying you can do something. But it can also be very liberating, because they can then experience their body fighting. And they can almost sort of, they can't change the past, but they can rewrite what would happen if it happened again, and sort of feel like they're taking back some control, because if it happened again, they would be better prepared. They would know what to do. And it also brings this, it helps people to focus on what they can do. Because often that helpless response comes from a very rapid assessment of, there's nothing I can do.
Right. And then this puts something on the table and says, well, actually, here's 3 things.
Exactly. Yeah, this puts on the table, actually, I've been in a sort of situation roughly like this, and I could do X, Y, and Z. And so suddenly you've already got, your body's got these things that it's done in that situation, and it can fight through. But for self-defense to be accessible to someone who has been through a traumatic experience like that, there's certain things that need to be in place.
Of course, I can imagine. And then this is what, and so then talking about your work with your husband's dojo, with the self-defense, is it that you guys have worked together to put together some programs or some class structures or frameworks for people in the community for this perspective?
This is something we've talked about a lot, and Tim's currently, as you would have mentioned, studying domestic violence.
Yep, he mentioned that.
They really need to put prevention of in front of that.
That's like, I'm currently studying fraud.
That's
sorry, in prevention of, that's right,
yes, that's right. So he is already very, very versed in this area, and it's certainly something we discuss a lot. But that, I mean, I guess that ability to do training with scenarios, but in a way that models that sort of consent process, that, are you ready for this process? And we're not going to do this unless you're comfortable and ready for that.
Otherwise you risk just replaying the experience from, like, the same helplessness of the experience.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to replay that helplessness experience. You don't want them to feel like they have to do whatever the training elements are. So you don't want to reinforce that helplessness, but you also don't want to take them too fast.
Right.
Because depending on how well they've processed what has happened in the past, events can trigger those emotions again. And so you don't want them to be too intense, and you want there to be a very easy, we've already gone through what I'm going to say if I need to stop this scenario sort of thing.
It's almost back at where we started the conversation, talking about the teenage girls that you focus on, the Party Safe program, saying, here are my my safe words, here are my keywords that indicate this has gone too far, or I need to be picked
Yeah.
up. But in a more adult context of
Yeah.
re-exploring these experiences.
Yeah, that's right. And also, I guess sort of being aware of the people's body language as well, because that can be a problem. It can be difficult to verbalize, or to say stop, or to, say I'm uncomfortable with this, either because of the social situation or because their brain's just gone into this mode, or whatever it is. So it can be helpful to say, like, pull them aside and say, hey, you're not looking really comfortable with this. Are you sure you want to continue? Or just, I guess, making it clear that they can,
there's an option,
stop at any point.
That's super interesting. And so you're saying that you guys haven't yet, but you are planning on working on developing some of these as a program and introducing them in the classes?
This is sort of something that Tim already does in his women's self-defense workshops.
Right.
He is always really good about working on consent. And I think in a way the impetus for him doing this study has been that he's had a few people come through his workshops that have had previous experiences. And initially he was like, oh, how do I deal with this? But he's, Tim, he's wonderful and very considerate, and he already, very naturally does that, making sure you're okay with this. So he's applied that really well.
Fantastic. And so maybe it's just about formalizing that into a coherent structure.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. So that would be definitely something that we'd need to formalize if we were to train anyone else up to deliver the workshops and that sort of thing.
Like a program.
Really
interesting.
Thank you. Another thing for trauma informed, I guess, is there's always the concern of, what do you do if someone does go into a panic, or
in the middle of the class
does have one of those triggering things happen to them. And I guess the end point is you want to make sure you know who you can refer them to, because obviously, in the dojo, even I wouldn't be treating a person, because
it's not the right context.
It's not the right context. It's not the right time. We're not, you're not a psychologist, but just making sure that, and I'm not a clinical psychologist, I don't do one-on-one, so just connecting them with someone who can help them is the end point. But in that moment, something that you can do is just help them to reconnect to the present, because something that can happen when people are triggered is it takes them back. And suddenly they're hearing and feeling and experiencing all those disconnected feelings that they had back then. And that's part of the problem of the frontal lobe having been offline. That's not in a coherent story. It's just this overwhelming influx of sensations.
Right.
And so sometimes if there's a triggering event, they can be feeling all that all over again. So what you can do in that situation is to try to bring them back to the moment. So you can do that by saying, I can see this has really affected you. How about we just focus on being in this room now? So how does it feel, the floor pushing up against your feet?
What can we hear?
Starting with something or the smell. Some people find breathing helpful, but for some people that can be triggering. So it can be tricky sort of finding what works for them. But if they have a worse reaction to something, say you're saying, okay, focus on breathing in and out, for example, and you can see that their breath starts going faster.
Hyperventilating.
Hyperventilating, then that's where you go, okay, let's focus on what you can hear, or let's focus on your feet against the floor, that sort of thing. So just finding some sort of sensation in the room, in the presence, that you can bring them back to is a good in the spot thing to do.
Oh, that's fantastic. No, thank you for adding that on. anyone listening, that's a whole new skill that they'll take with them to be able, in case they find themselves in that context.
Yeah, that's right. And if anyone's listening who has had some hard experiences, obviously getting help is really important. And if you feel like you need to talk to someone, there's plenty of helplines in Australia, and you can also ask your GP for a referral. But also, when you do get this overwhelmed feeling, you can do that yourself. Generally, take a moment when you're not overwhelmed and go through a mindfulness practice. And for different people, they'll find different things calming. For me, I really like just listening, just what can I hear?
Yeah, same.
But for other people, it can be the breathing. For other people, it can be the connection with the floor or the earth, or feeling the breeze, or whatever it is. But yeah, finding your safe place in terms of in the moment sensations. And then whenever you feel overwhelmed, you can go back to that feeling until you're calm enough to deal with it again.
You know, it's something I love, which we do at the start and end of every class, the bow, with the class bow. And this, obviously, because I'm just teaching my variation on Hoshin, it's borrowed right out of what we studied, you know, decades ago. We sit, the class starts, and we just go through the 5 sense organs, and we just observe sensation for a minute or two. And it is, I love being able to just practice pressing a bit of a reset button. You're like, oh, I had no idea there was sound going on until I decided to listen for it, or that I can feel my feet suddenly, you know, and the pressure of the ground. So it's funny because I think if that, like, it seems very innocuous, something that I think most martial arts do. Everyone goes in, there's a moment of, there's like a mental preparation for compartmentalizing. This is the space now where we're working in this way. It could almost be like a whole bunch of accidental practice of exactly what we're talking about, of some mindfulness training.
Yeah, that's
right. Accidental. It's not accidental at all, but you know, so I'm sure some dojos it's accidental. That it's just a tradition, but they haven't actually thought through the tradition in terms of what it does. But
yeah, that's right. And the more you practice that sort of mindfulness activity, the easier it comes. And therefore the quicker it can be as well, in terms of using it in your everyday life, to reset yourself when you start getting sort of angry at your kids or whatever it is.
one of my students had said, I think this was like mid 12-week challenge, and so it's been 6 weeks. He's had no coffee, you know, and he said that he was in traffic, driving this big truck, and he's, you know, people are cutting him off, and he's just, his head's about to explode, you know. And he said he suddenly remembered that he had the power to suddenly feel what the texture of the steering wheel felt like. And he became so lost in the texture that people are beeping him, and he realizes all the traffic's cleared, and he has to, like, you know, drive off in his massive truck. But I loved it. I thought it was such a great, like, what I wonder, that's what you want to hear. It's a great story that in the moment that it was really important, where he didn't just drive over someone. That was really good, that there was another option, you know, to observe sensation. You know, one of my meditation teachers from many years ago said to me kind of an offhand comment, and I was like, what? Said, you know that it's impossible to arrive at just a place of and you wouldn't even want to, you know, we've talked about that. He said, really, all you're going to do, your life of meditation study, is maybe you sit down and you start breathing, and then 2 hours later you realize you're off thinking about the weather and that guy that cut you off. He said, and then you pull it back and you remember, oh, that's right, this is what I was doing. And then anyway, an hour and a half later, you're something like, and that's why the milk. And he said the successful, you know, if you want to really become the greatest meditator on earth, that still happens. You just minimize the time period between consciousness observation. So maybe it's like 30 seconds or a minute of wandering off. He said, don't ever reach for some kind of voidless, you know, non-experiential place. Like, what's the point of that? Where's the fun in that, you know?
Yeah, actually that ties in quite nicely to some of the stuff we do in the resilience workshops too.
Right.
The A space in the DNAV is the advisor, so that's all your thoughts.
Right.
And it's helpful to realize that it's helpful to notice your thoughts, because often it's your thoughts that get the catastrophic thoughts and all those sort of thoughts
that run
that
off
then trigger the emotion, that then
Totally.
trigger the reaction. So that awareness of thoughts, even if it's, oh, my mind wandered again, got to bring it back, is actually a really helpful practice, because you start to recognize your thoughts. And that can be helpful for recognizing when your thoughts are not helpful.
Yeah.
You know, you're catastrophizing and saying this always happens and will forever happen, you
That's
know.
right. Yeah.
And sort of realizing when you're doing that, and then you can reframe it. But also for gaining some distance from those thoughts and going, well, my advisors, so I get the teens to practice saying, my advisor's saying I'm helpless.
Nice.
My advisor's saying you're useless, you know.
One of my that sounds just like one of my teachers. This is like 15 years ago. I think I'd made some comment to him. I said, I'm just feeling really angry, and he said, no, you're not, you're just experiencing anger. And it was a nice little, I took it on as a little it was a nice way of just inserting a gap between the experience as a kind of objective experience, and then a gap, and then the subjective experience of me, you know. And it was no longer I'm angry, it was, there's anger that I'm experiencing. There's some anger here, you know. It wasn't that I identified exactly I'm an angry person now, you know.
It's a really, really important skill for both, for all ages, to be able to add that gap. Because there's that consistent part of yourself. And if you think back on everything you've experienced, there's that consistent part of yourself that noticed everything. You know, maybe how you've acted or how you talk has dramatically changed. Maybe how you look's dramatically changed. All these things can dramatically change, but there's a part of you that has observed all of those changes.
Definitely.
Has observed all of those thoughts, all of that range of emotion. You know, so it can be helpful to acknowledge that there's that sort of deeper part of you, in a way, that's watching all this come and go.
Totally. That isn't there is that gap, there is that little separation between the events and experiences of the world and then my internalization of that.
That's right. And that can help you to gain a bit more control over your mental life, because things do just happen. You do just get emotions. You do just get thoughts. But you can take a step back and go, I'm observing that that's happening to me now.
You know. Definitely. Great chat. Look, I'm just aware of the time.
Yes. Sorry, you've been more aware than me. Thank you.
No, look, which is great, because I mean, we can keep chatting. I'm just aware that the young children probably need to wrap it up shortly. We've probably got another couple of minutes though. Is there anything that as we wrap up the conversation that you wanted to touch base on, or that we hadn't really fleshed out, or to say to the audience? Or
I really liked where that went.
That was
it was really, really fun and interesting conversation. So no, there wasn't anything that I had on my list that I really, really burningly need to say.
Awesome. We kind of wondered.
I will, however, if I can, plug that we have a podcast too.
Oh, fantastic. I did not know.
We do.
Should definitely do some cross promotion of that.
That's right. So finding time to add more episodes has been tricky. So there has been a little bit of a break.
Totally.
I'm impressed with how many you've got out.
Lockdown. Something to come out of Victoria lockdown is the amazing amount of home time that so where, if people are interested in the podcast, what are they, is it you or you and Tim? When you say we?
It's me and Tim. I'm mostly driving it, but I've interviewed Tim, and he comes on and he's sort of part of the who shall we interview?
Oh, great. Yeah, the panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
Panel. Yeah.
And if people are interested in following the podcast, where can they find them?
So that's www.personalstrength.com.au/podcast.
Awesome. That's great. I haven't even got the web link set up for mine, so you're ahead of me. I'm still directing everyone. I'm like, go to the YouTube channel, and we. That's cool though. Yeah. Okay. So maybe what we can do is when this goes up to the public, when with this recording's up on the channel, I'll make sure we add in the description the link, and so people can jump across and have a listen.
Great, thank you.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
That's great, Nikki. Well, look, we might we'll stay on the line just to touch base and say bye afterwards. But to everyone at home, we'll wrap up the this week's recording. So hopefully, students and everyone at home, you've thoroughly enjoyed that, and maybe you have more questions than even now than you had at the start of the talk. I hope that you stay warm, and remembering that coming up in the series, we have Nakadai Takahari Sensei, who is going to be taking us back through a wander through the history of Budo. We're going to be talking about ancient Japan, and he's going to be presenting lots of little videos and audio clips working forward. So keep an eye out for that on the show. Thank you very much for joining me tonight, Nikki. I really appreciate coming on the show.
You're really welcome. I really enjoy talking about this stuff. So
yeah, it's good. It shows. Well, we look, and maybe we should take up another one and delve into more areas. Be really fun.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome. All right, to everyone at home, have a good week. Thank you. Thanks, Nikki.
Thanks.
Bye everyone.